Thank you very much, John, and good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here, to be part of this amazing conference. I'm glad it can go ahead in this virtual way. It's really great to see that we have so many distinguished speakers and some great presentations already, and also a great turnout in terms of attendees. It's really nice to see. As John said, my name is Marcel Langeslag. I work for NACO in South Africa in our Johannesburg office. At the moment, however, I'm in the Netherlands in our office in The Hague. I do feel a little bit in Africa at the moment because the boardroom that we're currently sitting in is called the Cape Town boardroom, and you may be able to see some of the beautiful Table Mountain on the banner behind me. I'm joined today by my colleague Soufiane Daher. As John explained, he's an air cargo advisor. He has global experience, and today we will be talking about air cargo and how airports in Africa can make the most of the opportunities that it offers. Now, historically, air cargo has represented only a small share of airport revenues, perhaps in the single digits. And it's not always giving a lot of attention in terms of airport strategies and planning. However, due to the pandemic, this relative share of cargo revenue has grown as passenger revenues have dropped. People have also realized the importance of cargo in the pandemic, which is on the one hand, the diversification of revenues that it offers for both airports as well as airlines. But also, of course, the impact that it has on the economy in terms of facilitating imports and exports. We're also glad to see that cargo has weathered the COVID storm relatively well. One US airport that we work with told us cargo kept the lights on. So that's quite a clear statement about the importance for some airports. So, Soufiane, would you say that cargo has been a silver lining for aviation during the crisis?
Yeah, definitely, Marcel. I think that cargo has received a lot of attention since last year, probably the most amount of attention it has ever received in modern history. And that's something that we see in the numbers, because last year cargo traffic declined by only 9%, which could be seen as an achievement compared to a passenger traffic drop of 64% according to ACI. So really, we could say that cargo has been quite resilient to the crisis. Now, if we zoom in on Africa, we find that cargo handled by African airports declined by 21% last year, making it one of the regions that were the most impacted by the COVID-19 crisis in terms of cargo traffic. And one of the reasons for that is that cargo in Africa has traditionally relied on belly capacity. So a significant part of the cargo is actually was carried by passenger flights. So obviously, when those flights were grounded, it has proven quite difficult to replace that huge amount of capacity with dedicated cargo flights. But overall, cargo is ramping up. Globally this year, we are back above pre-crisis levels. So that's definitely promising. But still, there are some challenges lingering, especially in terms of availability of capacity.
Right. So in light of these dynamics, how would you think that African airports can seize the opportunities that cargo present?
Definitely, and that's a question that we keep hearing about. So what I would like to do is to ask the audience. So if John, if you can put up the first question already. So the question here is, what are the main opportunities for airports to develop cargo in Africa? And we have a choice between improving connectivity, both freighter and belly capacity, and developing cargo infrastructure, improving ground operations, and stimulating import and export markets. So I can imagine it can be quite difficult sometimes to choose, but we are quite curious to hear from you what would be the most important opportunity in today's market. So I'm just going to give it a bit of time for people to fill in the poll question.
Yeah, the votes are coming in nicely. So let's give it another 10 seconds, Soufiane, and then we'll close the poll and share the results.
Thank you.
All right, last couple of seconds, everybody.
Okay, so yeah, very interesting. We see that what comes on top is stimulating import and export markets. And I think that's quite important and has also been highlighted by various speakers today, is that cargo has significant impact on local economies. And here what comes to mind is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, as well as the Single African Air Transport Market. And these are examples of some of the governmental initiatives that are in place in order to help stimulate trade and therefore also stimulate air cargo. We also saw that connectivity was quite important. That was the second sort of opportunity up there. And connectivity, yeah, that's one of the main strengths that an airport can have in terms of developing cargo. Especially at a time like that, where there's a newfound importance for cargo. So airlines are thinking about cargo differently when it comes to their network development and also to their fleet decisions as well. So the opportunity here is for the airports to step in and be proactive about helping airlines to think about cargo in their route development and to really to show the value of cargo. Let's also not forget about cargo infrastructure. That's definitely an opportunity. And here we are talking about being open to new types of partnerships, like public-private partnerships that could be beneficial to secure investments that will be required for developing infrastructure. And with that, we also mentioned the importance of cargo ground operations. So obviously an airport needs quality operations and you need to have safety, security, and some of the things that really make the entire chain resilient and that works smoothly. So all in all, there's a lot of aspects that are needed in order to develop cargo. And maybe that's one of the complexities of cargo, is that it's not just about infrastructure. You also need to step in to facilitate and to work towards in the entire end-to-end cargo chain. But I'm curious, Marcel, from your experience with some of the airports in Africa, we spoke about the opportunities, but what could be the challenges that stand in the way of African airports in developing these opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Soufiane. I think that would be interesting to have a look at, and another opportunity to ask the audience what they feel. So if we can bring up the second poll, that would be great. The second poll asks, what are the key challenges for airports to develop air cargo in Africa? And the options that we have are low or unstable cargo demand, insufficient or inadequate funding, a lack of coordination in the cargo chain, or lastly, a lack of government support. So please pick one and submit your answers. Thanks for voting, everyone. Interesting results. I see the one that jumps out the most is a lack of coordination in the cargo chain. That's something that Soufiane also mentioned. Coordination is very, very important. And that's where airports can distinguish themselves from others by having a very efficient cargo value chain. One of the aspects that I think contributes to this being one of the major challenges is probably a lack of skills at various levels in organizations, from down on the ground to even in the boardroom. Cargo skills are not very widely spread, I believe. Compounding that is perhaps a lack of accurate data on market intelligence, data on demand, and data on performance and operations. So that's also a challenge that should be overcome if airports are to capitalize on the opportunities that are there. Another important challenge that also came out in the poll as the second one is the insufficient or inadequate funding. Now that possibly relates to some of the challenges that we see in infrastructure development. It can be very difficult for airports to find funding to develop new infrastructure, new cargo terminals, new aprons or taxiways or whatever might be needed. And accessing funding for that can be tricky, particularly for state-owned airports, which most airports in Africa are still government-owned. And we all know that governments have a lot of competing priorities and a limited budget, and particularly in times of a pandemic, there may be other things that get priority over spending on airport infrastructure. That's of course also where the opportunities come in that Soufiane mentioned for private involvement in funding through PPP structures. Another avenue might be development funding, which is also not always easy to access. So there's definitely challenges around the funding required for infrastructure. The third one that came out in the poll is the lack of government support. And this goes back to another aspect that was already mentioned, the sometimes over-regulation that we find in the African market. Customs procedures might be prohibitive in terms of importing and exporting certain goods. But also the connectivity is not always at the level where we want it to be. And a factor in hindering the development of connectivity is, of course, protectionism and the lack of open skies. So again, this is where the African Continental Free Trade Agreement come in terms of opening up opportunities for imports and exports, as well as SATEM for opening up more opportunities for improved connectivity. Lastly, a major challenge, as I mentioned, is of course the connectivity, and another aspect to the lack of connectivity is perhaps a difficult demand situation. Demand is not always high enough in certain African markets, particularly when you look at secondary or even tertiary airports. And that's then a challenge for airlines to operate profitably on those routes. In cargo specifically, the challenge is of course that cargo only flies one way, and filling up a cargo plane or belly capacity in both directions can be challenging if the imports and exports are not aligned. So those are some of the major challenges that I think we see in the market. So given that we've talked about some of the opportunities, I've mentioned a few of the challenges. What do you think airports can actually do about this? What should the airports in the audience and other stakeholders in the audience really take away from this discussion?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there are some key points here to take away, and I will try to be succinct, just given the time that we have. It might be a bit difficult to generalize because every airport is different. Also, across the wide African continent, there's a variety of different contexts and situations. However, if there's one point that I would like to emphasize today is the aspect of collaboration. And I'm glad that the audience has picked up on that as well, because in cargo, that is really critical. There's a lot of different stakeholders working together, and the cargo chain can be quite complex in that regard. And so there's really a role for airports here to be this facilitator, this orchestrator that is going to engage with different stakeholders and get them aligned. And I can mention 3 examples where the collaboration comes into play. The first one is when engaging with airlines. So this is really a time for airports to proactively see how they can help airlines to navigate the local regulations, to remove any barriers that they may have working against them in developing their cargo business, and really find the right place for cargo within the route development and the business cases that the airports develop. The second example has to do with engaging with the government, and that's because we recognize the value that cargo has towards the local economies. And we also recognize that developing a cargo strategy at an airport level should be consistent with the national strategies in terms of logistics and trade. So here what we are talking about is to work with governmental agencies, with trade organizations, in order to have that consistency in place and make sure that it fits within the overall national objectives. And the third aspect has to do with engaging with local cargo operators, in particular freight forwarders and ground handlers, in order for them to be on board of any facility development plans. So like we said, it's not always only about the infrastructure. You need to have the operators also on board, and you need to take their requirements on board when developing new projects for cargo in particular. So all in all, collaboration is the point that I would like to emphasize today, just to recognize the complexity of the cargo context.
Great, thanks for your insights, Soufiane. It's a pity we don't have more time, because I'm sure there are many other insights you could share and many other action points for airports to take away. But I think we've already given people a lot of food for thought and things for airports to incorporate into their strategies and their plans. We'd of course love to discuss this further. We'd love to hear from the audience and find out what some of your thoughts and questions are. We may not have time for that during this session, but we're always open for you to reach out to us, and we're happy to have any further discussions. You can find us on the conference platform or on our social media channels, or via John. You'll always be able to get in touch, and we'd be happy to chat further. But for now, thank you, Soufiane, and back to you, John.